Zora's sleek starship sliced through the atmosphere of Earth, its metallic hull gleaming under the blazing midday sun. The air was thick with anticipation as she gazed down at the blue and green orb below, an unfamiliar world filled with uncertainty. The princess of the Rigella, a race renowned for their advanced intellect and vast technology, had been dispatched on a diplomatic mission, one that would shape the future of her people's relations with humanity. Her fingers twitched as she reached for the communicator, her mind racing with the complexities of this mission. Marriage. The word echoed in her head, strange and foreign, something her people had discarded long ago as unnecessary. In her world, power and politics ruled, feelings, love, and relationships were mere luxuries. Yet here she was, on Earth, where these concepts weren't just commonplace, they were revered. The prospect of marrying a human seemed absurd. But Zora's orders were clear. She was to explore this relationship between her species and humanity, finding common ground where none existed before. As the ship touched down in a secluded, lush field outside a bustling city, she stepped out onto the soft grass, the scent of Earth's flora tickling her senses. The sunlight bathed her in warmth, making her feel vulnerable for the first time in her life. Zora was a princess, accustomed to power, comfort, and unchallenged authority. Yet standing here, on this strange world, she was just another being, far from the seat of her power. The alien princess felt her pulse quicken, uncertainty settling in her chest. Before she could fully acclimate to her surroundings, a voice called out from behind her. "You're the princess, right?" Zora spun around to find a group of humans, standing just beyond the edge of the field, watching her with curious eyes. At the forefront of the group was a man who stood taller than the rest, his broad shoulders and confident posture immediately marking him as someone of influence. His sharp gaze locked onto hers, as though reading her very thoughts. "You must be Zora of Rigella," the man said, his voice smooth but carrying an edge of authority. "Welcome to Earth." Zora took in his appearance, his rugged features, dark hair, and piercing eyes that seemed to analyze her with unsettling precision. He wore a simple shirt and pants, but the way he stood, the confidence he exuded, made it clear he wasn't just any ordinary human. He was different, something about him intrigued her, a feeling she couldn't place. "I am indeed Zora," she replied, her tone steady but with an undercurrent of curiosity. "And you are?" The man smirked, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "I'm Gabriel. Gabriel Stone. Leader of the adult HFY club." "HFY?" she asked, her brow furrowing as she stepped closer, intrigued by the mysterious name. "The Human First Youth Club," he explained, his voice deepening with pride. "We're a group of humans who believe in the strength and potential of our species. And we've been waiting for you, Princess Zora." Zora was taken aback. She hadn't been briefed on any such club. "Waiting for me?" she echoed, trying to suppress the unease rising in her chest. "What do you mean?" Gabriel's expression softened, his eyes now less calculating and more warm. "We've been preparing for this moment for a long time. For an alien species to come to Earth, especially one as advanced as yours. But more importantly, we've been preparing for you." Zora's heart skipped a beat. The tension in the air thickened, as though the very earth beneath her feet had shifted. She hadn't anticipated such an introduction. No one had told her that there were factions on Earth already preparing for alien encounters, let alone a group of humans who claimed to have been waiting for her. The implications of his words started to settle in, but she refused to let her guard drop. This was just the beginning, and she needed answers. "I don't understand," she said, her voice laced with both intrigue and skepticism. "What is it that you want with me?" Gabriel's lips twitched into a half-smile. "Nothing too complicated, Princess. We're offering you a proposal. A chance to experience human relationships, human love, something you may not fully understand. But we believe, if you give it a try, it could change both our worlds forever." Zora's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a typical diplomatic mission. She'd come to Earth expecting negotiations, a demonstration of humanity's capabilities, perhaps a display of culture. But this? A proposal for love? It felt like an elaborate game, one where she was a pawn, not a player. "I'm not here for games," Zora replied, her tone sharp, her regal posture unwavering. "I'm here to observe, to understand. If love is what you seek to showcase, then it will take more than words to convince me." Gabriel's smirk faltered for just a moment, his eyes flashing with something unreadable. "It's not just words, Princess. It's actions. And if you're willing to follow us, you'll see firsthand just what humans are capable of." Zora was silent for a moment, her mind racing. What was the real purpose behind this invitation? Was Gabriel truly offering her an opportunity to understand human emotions, or was there something more sinister at play? The idea of love, human love, was something she had little use for. But this wasn't about her feelings, was it? It was about her mission. "I'll follow," she said, her voice resolute. "But understand this, my allegiance lies with my people. And this relationship of yours, it's not something I'll take lightly." Gabriel's eyes locked onto hers, and for a fleeting second Zora thought she saw something more than just authority in his gaze. Something that felt like danger. But that was absurd, wasn't it? He was just human. Then, as if sensing her thoughts, Gabriel's smirk returned, darker this time. "Then let's begin, Princess." Zora followed him without hesitation, her every instinct screaming that this encounter would mark the beginning of something far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. The world around Zora seemed to blur as Gabriel led her deeper into the bustling city. Earth's chaotic energy hummed through the air, horns honking, people shouting, street vendors calling out their wares. It was overwhelming. Yet, the longer she stayed on this planet, the more she realized how different it was from Regella. Here, everything was rooted in raw emotion, in connections formed between people. Relationships, feelings, they weren't commodities or tools of statecraft. They were the heartbeat of the world. Zora was still unsure whether to be repulsed or fascinated by it. Gabriel walked at a steady pace, his long strides almost too perfect for a human. Zora found herself studying him more than she should have. His appearance was striking, muscular yet agile, confident in every movement, but there was something more beneath his facade. Attention. A guardedness she hadn't quite pegged yet. His face was hardened by years of leadership, but his eyes, those eyes held secrets, mysteries, something deeper than just a man leading a club of humans. Zora wondered if he was hiding something, or if this was his true self, shaped by a world so unlike her own. They reached a cafe, one that seemed oddly out of place amidst the concrete jungle. The soft hum of jazz music drifted from the open windows, mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries. Gabriel stepped inside without hesitation, holding the door open for Zora, a gesture that felt oddly human. She hesitated for just a second before following him into the warm, bustling interior. The barista behind the counter gave them a polite smile as they approached. Gabriel nodded in acknowledgement before turning to Zora. "What would you like?" "I highly recommend the espresso. It's one of Earth's best creations." Zora eyed the menu. There were so many choices, each one unfamiliar. Her mind swirled with the unfamiliarity of this world. She hadn't come here for coffee or pastries. She wasn't here to learn about the mundane pleasures of Earth. She was here to understand their culture, their emotions, their people, how they functioned, how they loved. Yet, Gabriel seemed so at ease in this environment. Too at ease. And that, more than anything, kept her on edge. "I'll take the espresso," Zora replied, her voice steady, though she wasn't sure what to expect from the dark liquid that would be placed before her. Gabriel ordered his drink and motioned for Zora to follow him to a table near the window. As they sat down, a tense silence settled between them. Zora's gaze swept over the cafe, taking in the oddities of human interactions. A couple in the corner exchanged soft words, their hands intertwined. Across the room, an elderly man laughed heartily with his friends, his face creased with age and joy. She had to admit, it was beautiful, this connection between people. But it also felt foreign. Strange. Too raw. Gabriel broke the silence, his voice low, but with an edge of something almost daring. You're not here just to observe, are you? Zora's brow furrowed, her eyes meeting his. I told you. I'm here to understand. To learn. He leaned forward, his intense gaze never leaving hers. And what happens after you learn, Princess? What happens when you understand humans better than you understand your own people? Zora stiffened. What did he mean by that? Gabriel's voice softened, almost as if he could read her confusion. I'm offering you more than just knowledge, Zora. I'm offering you a chance to experience something you've never experienced before. I'm offering you love. True human connection. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected such a direct confrontation. Love? She had been trained to be a leader, to use her mind and power to shape her people's destiny. Love, she thought, was a distraction. Something weak, fragile. A human indulgence. I'm here to study, not to participate in your version of love, she replied, her tone cold, measured. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, an amused smile tugging at his lips. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about my version of love. It's about you experiencing something real, something raw. The kind of love that changes lives. And I'm asking you, Zora, to join me in that experience. Her pulse quickened as his words settled into her mind. Join me in that experience. He wasn't just offering a study of emotions. He was offering a partnership, a chance to be part of something deeper than observation. But why? Why would he make such an offer to someone like her, someone so far removed from Earth's customs and desires? Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why me? Gabriel's eyes softened, and for a moment Zora swore she saw vulnerability in them. A glimpse of something she hadn't expected from a leader like him. Because you're not just any alien princess. You're someone who has the power to understand us, to lead us, and maybe, just maybe, show us a future we can't even imagine. Zora stared at him, feeling a sudden surge of confusion. Her mission had always been clear: gather intel, make observations, then report back to her people. But Gabriel's words, show us a future, that was something far more intimate than what she'd signed up for. Her thoughts were interrupted as the barista arrived with their drinks. Zora took the cup from him, the warm ceramic contrasting against the cold not forming in her stomach. She took a careful sip of the espresso, the bitter taste hitting her tongue. This is what they live for? She wondered, but then, as the rich flavor lingered in her mouth, she understood. It was simple. It was real. It was connection in a way she'd never known. She looked up at Gabriel, whose eyes hadn't left her since his offer. This wasn't a trap. It wasn't a test. This was his reality. The question, though, was whether it could ever be hers. She set the cup down, her gaze meeting his in silent challenge. You want me to learn love? She said, her voice steady, though uncertainty crept in. Then show me. Gabriel's lips curled into a knowing smile. I will. But be warned, Princess. Love is a dangerous game, and it's one that you might not walk away from the same. The words echoed in her mind as the tension between them crackled with something much deeper than just an invitation. Something far more dangerous than she had prepared for. And Zora knew, in that moment, that she had just stepped into something far greater than a diplomatic mission. Zora sat at the edge of the rooftop, her legs dangling over the side as she watched the city below. The lights flickered in the distance, a stark contrast to the eerie stillness of the night. The wind tugged at her hair, the soft hum of the city reaching her ears, but she barely registered it. She had grown used to the hum of Regella's night skies, but here on Earth, everything felt more alive, more unpredictable. Gabriel had offered her the world, the chance to experience something real, raw, human. But the price of that was becoming more unclear by the day. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. The air was thicker here, the scent of the city, a mixture of concrete, food, and exhaust, almost suffocating in comparison to the clean, sterile atmosphere of Regella. Her fingers curled around the edge of the building, the cold metal pressing into her skin, grounding her in the moment. Gabriel's words echoed in her mind. Love is a dangerous game, and it's one you might not walk away from the same. She opened her eyes, staring down at the streets below. They were alive with movement, with stories she would never fully understand. Yet there was a part of her that yearned to experience it, to live it the way humans did. To feel the rush of emotion, to build something real, even if it came at a cost. Footsteps broke her concentration, the soft tread of shoes against concrete pulling her back to the present. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Gabriel. I figured I'd find you here, he said, his voice smooth but carrying an underlying tension. He came to stand beside her, close but not touching. His presence was undeniable, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the consequences of what he had asked her. I needed space, she replied, her voice even, though the storm inside her was anything but. She shifted slightly, her gaze still fixed on the city below. I'm not sure what this is. What you're asking of me. Gabriel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his hand brushing against the metal railing. She could feel the heat from his body radiating through the space between them. He didn't move to close the distance, but there was something about the way he stood there, like he was waiting for her to make the first move. You're right, he finally said, breaking the silence. I'm not asking for something easy. But I am asking for something real. Something you can't learn from observation or study. You have to feel it, Zora. You have to experience it for yourself. Zora's pulse quickened at his words. She wasn't sure if it was the way he spoke, the weight of the moment, or the fact that she could see the raw honesty in his eyes. Gabriel wasn't offering her a simple experience. He was offering her a chance to change everything she knew about herself. About the way she had been raised, trained, and shaped for a destiny she was beginning to question. I'm not like you, Zora said, her voice laced with uncertainty. I can't just fall into this. I've been taught my whole life to be a leader, to be a symbol. Not a woman who feels. Gabriel turned to face her fully now, his gaze soft but unwavering. What if that's the very thing that makes you stronger? What if embracing who you are, who you could be, makes you a better leader? A better person? Her breath caught in her throat. A better person. The words hung between them like a delicate thread, and for a moment, Zora found herself questioning everything. Could she be something more than the cold, calculating princess her people had crafted her to be? Could she abandon the rigid structure of her life for something as unpredictable and vulnerable as love? I don't know how to do this, Gabriel, she whispered, almost ashamed of the vulnerability she was exposing. I've never let anyone close enough. And now, I'm not sure I even know how to trust anyone. Gabriel took a small step forward, closing the space between them just enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. Then let me show you. Let me be the one who teaches you what it means to trust. To love. I won't rush you. I'll be here, no matter what. Zora turned her head, her eyes searching his face. She saw no games, no hidden agendas, just sincerity. But how could she believe him? How could she give in to something she had never allowed herself to believe in? Before she could respond, a loud sound broke the tension, the sudden wail of an emergency siren far below them. Zora stiffened, her senses heightening, her body instinctively tensing as she scanned the area for danger. Stay here, she said sharply, already preparing to move. Her training kicked in, her mind calculating possible threats, but Gabriel's hand reached out, grabbing her wrist with a firm yet gentle grip. No, he said, his voice steady but commanding. Don't run. Not this time. Don't retreat into your armor, Zora. You're safe here. With me. Her heart raced, but not from fear of the siren, not from a threat. It was the way his words wrapped around her, urging her to stay, to be present. Her wrist tingled where he touched her, and for a moment, she was torn between the soldier she was trained to be and the woman who was starting to emerge from within. The siren faded as quickly as it had arrived, but the tension between them remained, thick and palpable. Zora's breath caught in her throat, and she met Gabriel's gaze, feeling the weight of her own conflict crashing down on her. I'm not ready for this, she whispered, but even as the words left her mouth, She wasn't sure if she was speaking the truth or simply trying to protect herself from the storm brewing within. Gabriel stepped closer, his hand now resting gently on her shoulder. Then let's take it slow. No expectations. Just let yourself feel. Let me show you how to live, Zora. How to really live. The wind stirred around them, but it felt as if the world had paused, waiting for her answer. And in that moment, Zora knew that her decision would shape not only her future but the future of the world she had come to care about more than she ever thought possible. She could either run from it, or take a chance on something she had never allowed herself to experience. And for the first time in her life, Zora wasn't sure which choice she would make. The rain came down in sheets, cold and relentless. Zora had not planned on being out in it, but when Gabriel had suggested they go for a walk, she couldn't refuse. She thought the rain might somehow wash away the turmoil she had been carrying, the endless, confusing pull between what she knew and what she was beginning to feel. But here she was, drenched to the skin, standing in the middle of a street that seemed to stretch endlessly into the city, with nothing but the sound of the storm to keep her company. Zora! Gabriel's voice broke through the sound of the downpour, low but commanding. He had positioned himself just in front of her, his silhouette half obscured by the sheets of water, but his presence was undeniable. Talk to me. She lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze, steady, unwavering, and full of the same raw honesty that had unsettled her since the first moment they had crossed paths. But this time, something in his eyes shifted. There was no impatience, no demand. Only understanding. Her heart beat faster, and for a brief moment she wondered if he could feel it too. If he could sense how deeply she was being pulled in two directions, one toward the strength of her destiny and the cold, calculated life she had been trained for, and the other towards something she could no longer deny. I'm trying, Zora said, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. But I don't know how. I don't know how to let go of everything I've built. The words came out harsher than she intended, but Gabriel didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for her, his hand brushing against the soaked strands of her hair, pushing them back from her face in a tender gesture. His touch sent a ripple through her, something warm and unfamiliar, but she didn't pull away. You don't have to let go of everything, Gabriel said, his voice firm but gentle. But you do have to stop holding onto it like a shield. You're not protecting yourself, Zora. You're just hiding. From me. From yourself. Her breath hitched. She had never allowed anyone this close to her heart, not like this. Certainly not a man. But in this moment, standing under the storm, with the world muffled by the rain, she realized how much she had been holding back. How much she was afraid to let go. I'm afraid, she confessed, her voice trembling for the first time. I'm afraid that if I let myself feel, truly feel, I'll lose everything I've ever worked for. My people need me to be strong, Gabriel. They need me to lead. Gabriel didn't speak right away. Instead, he took a step closer, his body now almost touching hers. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her pulse spike, but she didn't pull back. Not this time. I'm not asking you to abandon them, he said, his voice soft but resolute. I'm asking you to trust that you don't have to be alone in this. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. Not if I'm here. Not if we're here together. Zora swallowed hard, trying to steady the storm inside her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe in this, in him, but the life she had been born into wasn't so easily cast aside. She couldn't afford to let down her guard. She couldn't afford to be weak. But Gabriel didn't see weakness in her. She could see it in the way he was looking at her, as if he saw her as more than the woman she had been trained to be. He saw the woman she could become. The woman she was beginning to want to be. I don't know how to be this, she said, almost ashamed. I don't know how to be vulnerable. To let someone in. Gabriel's hand slid down her arm, tracing the curve of her elbow before taking her hand in his. The simple touch sent a shock of warmth through her. She hadn't realized how starved she had been for something so simple, so intimate. You don't have to know how, Zora, he said, his voice a murmur as he gently tugged her toward him. You just have to be willing to try. For a long moment Zora stood there, her heart racing, her mind fighting against the tide of emotions crashing against her. She had been taught that love was a luxury, a weakness that could be exploited. But Gabriel's words were different. His words were a promise. A promise of something real, something grounded in trust, not manipulation. The rain continued to fall, drenching them both, but Zora felt as if a fire had been lit inside her. She wasn't sure where it came from, or why it was burning so fiercely, but she couldn't deny it anymore. Gabriel was not asking her to give up her power, her strength. He was offering her a chance to feel something more. You're not going to let me run away, are you? Zora said, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips despite the gravity of the moment. No, Gabriel replied with a grin of his own. Not this time. For the first time in what felt like forever, Zora allowed herself to lean into the warmth of his embrace. It was a small step, but it was a step. A step towards something unknown but undeniably real. She didn't know what would come of it, or where it would lead them, but in this moment she wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone anymore. As the rain began to lighten, Gabriel's lips brushed against her forehead, his arms around her tightening just enough to let her know he was there. And for the first time in a long while, Zora allowed herself to believe in something she had never considered, that love, raw and unfiltered, could be her strength, not her weakness. But the storm was far from over. The sound of a distant explosion broke the calm between them, followed by the unmistakable hum of sirens. Zora's body tensed, the weight of her responsibilities crashing back down on her. I'm sorry, she whispered, stepping back slightly. I can't just ignore it. There's something isn't right. Gabriel watched her, his gaze hardening, but there was no judgment in his eyes. Then let's face it together.